Twitser is directed by Jan D. Bont, starring Helen Hunt, Bill Paxton, Philip Seymour Hoffman, amongst many other people. Came out in 1996, about 25 years ago, and it tells the story of a group of storm chasers who are using this advanced warning system that they call Dorothy to release into the tornado to get the exact readings of inside the funnel of a tornado, which scientists have been never able to do until this point, so that way they could create an advanced warning system and give more people time to get to the safety that they need to get to. Twitser was one of my favorites as a kid. I watched this almost religiously. I found the idea of tornadoes just extremely fascinating, and I still do even today. Once in a while I'll watch like tornado videos and how it's formed, where exactly they're common in Tornado Alley in the central United States. Seeing storm chasers on the Weather Channel following these things and getting sometimes extremely close. It's scary, yet I find it so enticing that I can't stop myself. And as far as natural disaster films go, I think Twitser is one of the best entries in that genre, despite all the inaccuracies that I'm sure plenty of weather experts have said over the years, and we will get to those. I'm not blind to any of those things. As I said, this group of storm chasers is trying to release this advanced warning system inside this funnel of the tornado, any tornado that they could find in their travels. Bill Paxton's character, Bill Harding, used to be married to Jo Harding, played by Helen Hunt, so he comes back with his now fiance, who's a reproductive therapist. Okay. Jo didn't sign the divorce papers, and he's trying to get her to sign the divorce papers, and they just never get the chance to do so because something else comes up and they have to chase after the storm. But he actually used to work with this group of chasers, and they worship him like he's like a god, basically, because he had this cavalier attitude towards this one tornado that they encountered. There was an evil Bill, and I killed him. And they're also dealing with a rival storm chaser team led by Jonas, who's very much after the same thing, but he's in it for the money and the glory. Played by Carrie Yules, who you might know as Jerry from Liar Liar. And I think he's also in Princess Bride and probably a few other things too, but that's besides the point. That guy's really good at playing someone who's very eccentric and just weird and kind of a jerk. In this movie, it's no different. So stick around, because the days of sniffing the dirt are over. So in their journeys, they're chasing after these various storms that are forming under the storm front that's hovering over the Oklahoma area. And as they go on, the storms just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And this group of people is probably one of the highlights of this movie. They just have such a great rapport with each other that even though they have the smallest parts, every single one gets to make their mark.
Sweeping down the plain and the waving wings. That's no moon! It's a space station!
Star Wars references for me are always a win. Alan Ruck, who is Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, shows up in here as their navigator that they call Rabbit.
Yeah. Trust me, Rabbit is good, Rabbit is wise. Mother of God. Christ.
Well, Kansas is a mess and there's a big crease down in Wichita. Roll the maps. And Jeremy Davies, who was Corporal Upham in Saving Private Ryan, shows up in this movie. But the one who's probably the most fun and most excitable is Dusty, played by the late, great Philip Seymour Hoffman. God rest his soul. He's clearly having a good time here. It might come off as very cheesy and just really basically a product of its time. It was the 1990s. It shows you that this movie is really just in there for the fun. It's not really concerned about how this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense with the meteorology. This movie seems to know that, and it embraces the campiness of this whole thing. And Philip Seymour Hoffman goes right along with it. So does Bill Paxton, who we'll get to later. It's the suck zone, basically in which the Twister sucks you up. That was intense. That was intense.
Are you okay? Did you just miss that truck? That's awesome! That's awesome! What's up?
This poor woman had a truck land in front of her, and he's just geeking out over how cool that was. But as Hoffman was able to show throughout most of his career, he does have his serious moments, like when Bill and Jo have that big argument on top of the hill. Dusty, who's basically the comic relief, didn't have anything to say. And even when he tells Jo that an F5 is forming not too far away from where they're at, something that Jo has been searching for ever since she was a child. Jo is a very eccentric type of person, played really well by Helen Hunt. She's very determined to chase after these tornadoes and get to the bottom of what's going on. Ever since she was a kid, she's been fascinated with tornadoes ever since the F5 struck her farmland and ultimately killed her dad. So she feels like she has to figure this thing out in order to stop the same thing from happening to somebody else out there. Only then to be confronted by Bill on the hilltop that putting herself at risk is not going to bring back her father. The whole divorce thing ultimately gets thrown by the wayside because Melissa realizes that Bill is still in love with Jo, and that character in particular She did not need to be in there. She had nothing to her at all. There was nothing interesting about her. But she was really in there to show the audience that he has a new life and he's ready to move on. She basically has this fish out of water attitude. When she goes with the guys to Aunt Meg's house and she has this big steak put on her plate, she's just horrified by what she's seeing. My upbringing was pretty sheltered. Even my dad made steak when we were in the house. Then there's the late Bill Paxton. This is a guy who is was a very one-in-a-kind type of actor, and everything I've heard about him is that he was a really down-to-earth kind of person and a very genuinely good guy, and an actor that we've lost way too soon. Because this guy played his character so uniquely, from Aliens to that one small scene that he has in Terminator. Hey, I think this guy's a couple cans short of a six-pack. And True Lies and Titanic. He owns every scene that he's in. Some of his quirks are just so irresistible. Like when Joe's telling him to get closer to this tornado that they're following, and she says, "Have you lost your nerve?" Tighten your seatbelt. And after they drive through that one house that rolls onto the road, maybe we should get off of this road. But like Hoffman, he also has his serious moments too, when he's pouring his heart out to Joe, and he shows genuine concern for the other people that are feeling troubled or really scared by what's happening, like his fiance, or an Aunt Meg when they try to go inside her house to find her. And the thing about his character, he's basically described as the human barometer by Joe. In other words, he's the tornado whisperer of sorts. He takes one look at these things, and he's able to determine what exactly it's gonna do.
The updraft, the angle. It's gonna shift its track.
Are you sure?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a sidewinder. It'll move left.
Is that bad?
It shows the audience that this guy is actually really smart, and he knows what to do when the you-know-what hits the fan. On that note, that's the biggest compliment that I can give this movie, is the atmosphere. Like, they actually filmed a lot of this on camera, and you actually feel like you're in a real place where all these storms are happening. Jan D. Bont knows exactly where to put the camera right outside of the cars or the trucks that they're driving in. All the rain's coming down, the winds are howling, the way they're able to meld the real locations with the CGI effects of the tornadoes. It feels like these storms are actually happening right in front of us. And admittedly, ever since I saw this movie as a kid, once in a while, I still have nightmares about these tornadoes. A lot of that is also due to the musical score that plays into the very tense feel, like in particular the drive-in scene when they sense the F4 coming in, right when The Shining is playing on the big screen. Right when that tornado comes in, as Jack Nicholson says, "Here's Johnny." Then there's also the growling sound that the tornadoes make. Now, I'm no expert in meteorology, and nor am I a storm chaser, and I've never experienced a tornado. For those of you who don't know, I live in Pennsylvania. Nowhere near Tornado Alley. Although we've had a couple of tornadoes to my recollection. I think the highest that we've gotten was probably an F1, but here in Pennsylvania, it's extremely rare. And real quick, this movie makes me not want to live out in Oklahoma or Texas or Kansas. I prefer to live closer to the ocean, but knowing that these things have to show up every spring or summer, no thank you. Any people from that area of the country are watching this, you are much more braver than I will ever be. But as far as the growling sound the tornadoes make, I've watched plenty of videos of those things. That does not happen at all. Not to mention how close they get to these things, and they don't even get hit by a piece of debris. And when they tie themselves down to that pipe when the F5 finally shows up, they get right inside the center of that thing, and their limbs don't get ripped off. I've said before in other videos, you have to suspend your disbelief in some way. And if you have a knowledge of weather, or if you're an expert in meteorology or a storm chaser, this movie might not be for you. If you watch it with a logical perspective, you're not gonna have a good time. But if you watch it from the perspective of it being a movie, you're gonna have a good time. And as far as some overdramatic stuff, like when Melissa goes, "Is there an F5?" everybody just hushes. Like, we don't talk about the F5. And a few other ridiculous things, like when the house rolls onto the road and Joe and Bill drive right through the living room of that thing with the teddy bear hitting the windshield. Not to mention a cow going back and forth between those water spouts as they're driving down that narrow road. Even as a kid, I couldn't help but really notice some of those things. And the special effects on the tornadoes for the time period of 1996, I think they look pretty good. When you take a look at them up close though, they are a bit noticeable. And if you were to watch it on VHS or DVD, it's probably better that way because it makes it look a bit more muddled and like you're watching it like from a found footage perspective. But like I said, even for that time period, it looks pretty good. And the payoffs that we get in the movie, not when Jonas ends up getting killed by the F5, even though that is kind of satisfying, but also really makes you groan because the guy is just so stupid. And everybody else is telling him, no, don't do that, it's too dangerous. But they finally manage to get Dorothy to go up inside the tornado. Since they have to latch it down to something really hard, they're able to get the sensors inside, and they're able to get a good reading on what's gonna happen. So therefore, they're able to show their research to the world. Oh, and I also really like how Helen Hunt says this.
Where's my truck?
I'm happy with my life. I'm happy with the way things are going in my life. I'm happy with Melissa. I know her name. Yes, I'm happy with Melissa. You look happy. So Twister might not make a whole ton of sense from a scientific perspective, but it's really just pure popcorn entertainment that I think is a ton of fun. For the most part, I'm able to look past that stuff. And if I had to pick a favorite Bill Paxton role, this is probably the one for me. Bill, if you're up there listening to me right now, thank you so much for playing a big part of my childhood. I'll always be grateful for that. Same thing for Philip Seymour Hoffman. A lot of the other actors are really fun too. And also, you got a really cool soundtrack with Van Halen music. How can you go wrong? That's my verdict on Twister. What are your guys' thoughts on the movie? Comment below and tell me, and I'll see you guys in the next video.